this time, I will call the meeting of the Marshall City Council to order with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, welcome everyone to this meeting this evening. The council is connected by Zoom. We are originating this from the Merit Center as we're still operating under our emergency operations. So because the council is connected by Zoom, we will have the roll call as well individually, and votes this evening will be roll call votes. I will ask City Clerk Kyle Box to take the roll.
Mayor Burns.
Here.
Craig Schaefer.
Here.
Steve Meister.
Present.
Glenn Bearcooler.
Here.
John DeCramer.
Here.
Russ Labatt.
Here.
Jim Lozinski.
Here.
And so the council is all present. We have an agenda before us. Are there any changes to this agenda this evening? If not, we'll operate under that agenda. We'll move us then to agenda item number 2, which is to consider the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting that was held on May 12th, 2020. The council does have the minutes. Are there any corrections to note at this time?
Move to approve the agenda as written.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, Kyle, will you take the vote?
Mayor Burns.
Yes.
Craig Schaefer.
Yes.
Steve Meister.
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler.
Yes.
John DeCramer.
Yes.
Russ Labatt.
Yes.
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
The motion does pass. The agenda item number 3 is consider the approval of the minutes of the local board of appeal and equalization. The reconvened meeting was held on May 19th, 2020. Once again, the council serves as that board, and the council has the minutes of the meeting. Are there any corrections? If not, is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
Motion by
John.
Motion by John. It was seconded. Jim, did you second that? Steve seconded it. So motion made and seconded. Discussion. All in favor. Kyle, will you take the vote?
Mayor Burns.
Yes.
Craig Schaefer.
Yes.
Steve Meister.
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler.
Yes.
John DeCramer.
Yes.
Russ Labatt.
Yes.
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
And the motion does pass. We'll move then to agenda item number 4. This is the award of bids this evening. Consider the award of bids on the South First Street project. 2 actions then that will be before us. One would be the resolution declaring the official intent regarding the reimbursement of the expenditures with the proceeds of tax-exempt bonds. And then the second action would be the resolution accepting the bid and awarding the contract. So the council has received the results of the bid. I'll call on City Engineer, Director of Public Works, Jason Anderson, to provide detail. Jason?
Thank you, Mayor. This project, we all know well by now, it's a reconstruction and utility replacement on South First Street between Southview Drive and George Street. It's water, sanitary sewer, and road surfacing. Also includes some lift station, force main alterations and improvements at First and Shepherd. Also includes adding sidewalk on the west side of the road. On May 22nd, we received bids for this project, and we received 2 bids, one from D&G Construction, the other from Dunnick, Inc. Dunnick was the low bid with the amount of $617,136.55. That's below the engineer's estimate by around $30,000. I think staff would just recommend to award. We've got an amount of about $750,000 when you include 5% allowance for contingencies and 16% engineering. So I'll entertain questions.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Questions from the council?
Mr. Mayor, just a question on the resolution. We said the principal amount of debt expected to be issued for the project referred to above will not exceed $775,000. Why the difference?
Jason?
Yeah, I can address that. It's been past practice to add 25,000 to that amount. That's been just historical practice on all of our construction projects. You get the 5% plus 16 and you add 25 just in case.
So it's a not to exceed amount.
It's a not to exceed amount.
Thank you.
Other questions? If not, you have the recommendation. I'd entertain a motion.
I move approval.
I'll second if that's the approval to declare official intent regarding reimbursement.
Yeah, it's recommendation number one, the approval of reimbursement of expenditures, proceeds of tax exempt bonds.
Motion by Craig, seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Kyle, please.
Mayor Burns,
Yes?
Craig Schaefer,
Yes.
Steve Meister,
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler,
yes,
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
No,
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
And the motion does pass. And then the second action would be the resolution accepting the bid and awarding the contract.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it. Jim Lozinski.
Motion by John, seconded by Jim. Discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Steve?
I like the fact that we have that contingency built in, but I'm not so much a fan of the size of it. When we have the budget, we have the bid. The bid came in significantly under the estimates of the engineers. I think the not to exceed should be significantly less. What it should be, I guess that's for discussion, but I'm not of the ilk that we keep doing things just because it's been always that way in past practice. I think we need to reevaluate that with some discernment, especially in lieu of finances and present and especially future.
Thank you, Steve. Jason, you have any comment?
I think the only thing I would comment on that, I would just say that we leave the financing amount and bonding amount up to the finance department. We're just putting this into the resolution as an authorized amount. I'm not saying that finance will bond that amount. I'm not certain how much they'll bond, but this gives them the authority to go up to that amount. So we don't know what they know better than us, what the financial position is of the city and how much reserves and how much they want to bond and how they want to move money. So.
Okay, other discussion on the motion?
do the finance people want to comment on this?
Yes, we, up until the day that we have the bond sale, we can kind of tweak the numbers, and we do so based on if we have the engineer's estimate versus the actual. So we go off of what Jason has built in already for his contingencies and everything. So I don't have the exact number in front of me, because I think Kyle, I don't know if you can pull that original one, his memo back up.
151,000, and that is the 5% allowance for contingency and engineering.
So, but I don't think, let me see if I can pull up my other spreadsheet. It's because there is a limit to what I can do also based on the public hearing that we had, was it a month and a half ago? So for this project, we have, sorry, it's still loading.
Probably the question in that would be, is there any reason to go higher than that 751?
To go higher than the 751? No.
Okay.
Nope, I wouldn't
think
have.
that's what Steve's point was.
Okay. Yep. No, we wouldn't go any higher than that.
Given that, John, do you want to amend your motion on the resolution to match that number?
But we can add that as a maximum. That would be fine.
And,
Can I ask a question? Whenever you're ready.
and Jim, you're fine with that too?
Yes.
Okay, Sharon, any other comments?
Just a question for Annette and Jason. The project cost could exceed the 5% contingency.
Absolutely.
We don't know that until we get through the project. So, and I'm not advocating that it needs to be whatever, $25,000 more, but it's not an exact science. And the 751, it may be more.
But the bonding would be done prior to the project being
Well,
completed.
that's true.
Right, and
But
for this,
to have some latitude in that.
for this particular project, we have a little over 400,000 that's being bonded for. Otherwise, we're using cash from the wastewater and MMU. So we're not anywhere near that 750 for bonding purposes. It's based solely on the funding mechanisms that are paying it back, whether or not they can cash flow that or the bond. So like Jason said, it's mainly a maximum, but we will not bond anywhere near that for this particular project.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, I'll move us to a vote on the motion for the resolution, recognizing that the maximum amount on listed in the resolution is that number 751,000. I don't have the last three digits. $751,672.32. Kyle, would you take the vote?
Mayor Burns,
Yes.
Craig Schaefer,
Yes.
Steve Meister,
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler,
Yes.
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
No,
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
And the motion does pass. We'll move then to the consent agenda. And we'll bring the items on the consent agenda up on the screen. So on the consent agenda this evening, consider authorization to declare vehicles as surplus property for the Marshall Police Department, setting a public hearing date for the MS4 permit program summary for the 2019 activities. Consider the request of Marshall Downtown Business Association for Crazy Days, Thursday, July 16, 2020. Consider the request of Southwest Minnesota State University for a homecoming parade, Saturday, October 10, 2020. The 1997 Smart Trailer donation from the city of Eden Prairie. Consideration of the declaration of surplus items from the Marshall Fire Department. Consider the ratification of the Economic Development Authority revolving loan fund, and consider approval of the bills and the project payments. Is there any item on the consent agenda any member of the council wants removed for purpose of separate discussion?
Mr. Mayor, number 10, please.
Any other item? If not, is there a motion on the remaining items on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
John DeCramer.
Motion by Jim, seconded by John. Discussion. The one discussion item that I had on the consent agenda, I didn't want this removed from, because it didn't deserve separate discussion. But City of Eden Prairie donating to the city of Marshall. Is there any background on that?
It's a speed trailer similar to the current.
Yeah.
Speed trailer.
I guess Chief Marshal will respond to that question, but I guess my question is, why is the city of Eden Prairie so generous to the city of Marshall?
They were moving forward with new technology, and they knew that there was still value in that trailer. And they had been working with the Towards Zero Death program, and the coordinator of that program had highlighted some of the work that we've done here locally, and thought that we could utilize it, as well as maybe share it with other departments in the area that are part of that program. It's a little bit larger. If you can picture our current speed trailer, it's a little bit larger. So I thought it'd work better, as you can see in my agenda item report. I work better on our highways, bypass and stuff, be more visible, and maybe just safer out there in the wind than our current one. So that's kind of the
Thank you.
message behind that.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the consent agenda items? If not, Kyle, would you take the vote?
Mayor Burns,
Yes.
Craig Schaefer,
Yes.
Steve Meister,
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler,
yes,
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
yes,
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
And the motion does pass. Agenda item number 10, then consider the declaration of surplus items for the Marshall Fire Department. Russ?
thank you, Mr. Mayor. Probably addressed to Annette or Carla if she's still on. I think in the last meeting we had, we talked about the First Street project, and if the bids came in lower, we could reduce the size of the bond. My question, if we sell these breathing apparatuses, will that reduce the cost of that bond? Because I think we bonded $230-some thousand for the new air packs, or does it go into the general fund?
Correct. At this time, since it wasn't budgeted that way, it'll just go back into the general capital equipment fund for future use.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
Mr. Mayor,
Quentin.
if I may, there's actually zero value to those. I've had a discussion with City Attorney Simpson about those breathing apparatuses. If it's available to declare them as surplus and attempt to sell them, his recommendation, and he can speak to this if he wishes, is to destroy and dispose of them. So the city accepts no liability in the event of a catastrophic failure of them. The composite cylinders are no longer able to be hydro tested after 15 years, and they're past that, which is why we needed new. So I'm here for any questions if there is any, but we would have to destroy those.
And Quentin, because of the OSHA requirements for, fully self-contained breathing, either supplied air or cylinder, the same holds true for the face masks, and then there's no real use for the backpacks either, correct?
On the new NFPA standards, the 2018 standards actually change the face pieces and the regulators and how they attach. They actually have to attach with 2 buttons to the face mask. So those essentially go with it, and there isn't any value with keeping those as well for that, because it doesn't meet the compliance. We wouldn't be able to use them here as well. As for selling them, it's a possibility that the face pieces could be sold. I don't know how much time I have personally to onesie-twosie sell them in an auction. And there's only a few that would, match up to that description anyway.
Any other questions for Fire Chief Quentin Brunsvold? Thank you, Quentin. So I would entertain a motion on the surplus items for the Marshall Fire Department.
So moved. Meister.
Motion by Steve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Craig. Discussion?
I have a quick question because I agree with you, Quentin. That was my question of why can we sell these? Steve, shouldn't your motion be not necessarily surplus property that we deem them as garbage, that we throw them away?
Well, thank you, Jim, for that. I was thinking about that, but isn't it the same thing? What we do with them once they're declared surplus, does it matter?
And I thought the same thing, but I think that as long as the understanding is surplus means destroyed, and I really think that they need to have a hole punched in them or backed over by the dozer or something to destroy them so that somebody can't dumpster dive, take them out, and then have something happen with them.
I think the staff has that direction. So
But just from my experience, I'm with you, Craig, because like when I throw away a ladder, we actually cut it up and throw it away so it can't get used. So sounds good.
Okay. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Kyle?
Mayor Burns,
Yes.
Craig Schaefer,
Yes.
Steve Meister,
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler,
yes,
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
Yes,
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
And the motion does pass. We'll move then to agenda item number 13. Agenda item number 13 is the first of 2 tabled items from the last meeting. Agenda item number 13 is the introduction of the ordinance amending the height modifications and yard modifications, accessory buildings, accessory equipment. I would entertain a motion to remove this from the table.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll go to a vote. Kyle?
Mayor Burns,
Yes.
Craig Schaefer,
Yes.
Steve Meister,
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler,
yes,
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
yes,
Jim Lozinski.
yes,
And the motion does pass. This is an item that was tabled, because of some comments or concerns about the public, ability during these times to access the public hearing. I think, Jason, you've given some more additional thought into how that could and should be accommodated. Should we still be in restricted, even though some of those restrictions have been modified by governor's order within even the last week. And there is also some technology options. And in this item in particular, as well as the next, are mostly housekeeping, and in fact are not adding restrictions. They're probably loosening some restrictions. So some of the concerns that perhaps people would have about additional restrictions maybe aren't there with these two. But I'll let you go ahead and talk about anything. And Sharon, you may have some comments also, as well as the council.
Thank you, Mayor. Sharon, would you like to start, or would you like me to start? Okay. I think I'll just echo what the mayor said a little bit to start with, and just highlight that this ordinance and the next are largely housekeeping items. They're not staff-driven or council-driven wholesale changes to the ordinance. They are items that staff has been writing down over the past 6 months to a year or longer on some. When we encounter different things with different residents or different developers, and we say that does not make sense, we highlight it, we make a note, and we put it on the list. When we get the list that we feel is long enough and complete enough, we bring it forward to the council. A large driver on this one would be the interim use permit concept that we implemented not that long ago, and the city tree policy that was approved and put into place. So it's just making the language between those documents, the ordinance and the policy, congruent. So, this ordinance in particular is a belt loosening, if you will. I don't think there's a single thing in here that could be considered more regulation. It is very much a loosening of the regulations in certain instances when we just felt like it needed it. So that's where I can go with this. And I think from the staff perspective, the thought of having this sit on the table for weeks or months indefinitely was kind of troubling. And we wanted to find out if there was a way to get action on this item one way or another. So that's what we're here to talk about. Sharon, did you want to jump in?
One of the things that I wanted to comment on, we know that there's potentially some additional upcoming changes, and one, maybe two of the upcoming changes is related to economic development. So the current ordinance language would prevent economic development. And so it's not related to this particular item, but again, kind of back to at what point do we maybe embrace the situation we're in and try to conduct a public hearing in multiple ways, more than just being in person. One of the statistically, I guess, when we've looked across other entities, when there's additional options for public participation, you actually get more participation. And I'm not sure what that looks like. We could use technology, or I know in previous public hearings we've had them submit written comments. We now are allowed to have 10 people in a room. That isn't something that we were really allowed to do before. We still have to do social distancing, but maybe the last week's governor's relaxation promotes it, but also, again, is there ways to kind of embrace where we're at and seek out new ways for public participation? one of the things I think about is, you know, we have a really good following on social media, and sometimes some of the regular required public notices get kind of lost because the majority of the people, maybe we don't think that, but statistically, again, the majority of people don't care that much about our regular public notices. They care more about the messagings and kind of the stories we have to fill. And, you know, some larger cities have actually sectioned off or created a separate Facebook page for public notices, and people sign up for them, then they get all those notices and kind of track them that way. And I think that's something to consider too, but I'm probably getting too farther along here, but maybe just kind of adding, is there, it seems like we can conduct this public hearing, and then at some point here, I think near July, it looks like we're tracking it. If we don't have a public hearing, it could prevent economic development. So that's all I wanted to comment on.
Okay, so we'll open it up for input from the council.
Mayor, John DeCramer.
Yes, John.
This is really a question back to Jason. We've had discussion on this at our last meeting, so we did bring some attention to this issue. Have you had any feedback from anyone over the last 2 weeks?
No, we have not. It would be atypical for us to get too much feedback on these ordinance changes, to be honest. But
well, the other point on that is that this agenda item is not adopting the changes. It's simply introducing the ordinance and calling for the hearing that would be at the future meeting. So, correct. And there is a possibility that future meeting that things might be opened up more. Okay, other input.
Mr. Mayor, and maybe this comes at the next meeting, but I'm happy to hear that we're relaxing some of the requirements. But just a question to Jason. I mean, it looks like requiring at least 3 feet of clearance along alleys for snow removal and more for garages for cars parking in front of them. And that list that you've got on the page, how do we plan to enforce them, or are we just not going to enforce them? Are we just going to give, residents a chance to move their car for snow removal, or if they park an RV that's extended longer than into the right of way for longer than 10 days? I'm just curious how we plan to enforce these or monitor these.
yeah, it's a good question. We typically don't do a lot of enforcement with these types of ordinances. They're more complaint based. So we hear about it from a resident because they might anonymously complain about something or raise a concern with something. We check it against the ordinance and then we follow up accordingly. A lot of these are more planning and zoning related, where if someone comes for a building permit for a deck, we might have to check it against setbacks. And then we say, well, man, in this case, this was really kind of a bummer that they have to pay for a variance. We should adjust this. So we just make a list and we come up with a list of these items, and that's one of them in here. So the alley one that you mentioned is probably the one that's maybe not a complete loosening. That's giving us actually a little more space for snow removal in the alleys, because garages right up against the alley or too near the alley are a problem. Or fences, for example. Fences are a big one.
Yeah, and the only reason I brought that up, Jason, is that I would think that alleys would be a problem anyway with snow removal. I mean, Councilman Schaefer, I think, lives with an alleyway, and most alleys are probably difficult to go through anyway with snow. And I know our staff does a great job of trying to get those cleared right away, but it's just, yeah, it's an ongoing issue, I think. The other one that kind of caught my eye was the very last one, is that allowing accessory equipment in the front yards, if fully screened by a fence. I don't know if I've ever seen a fence in the front yard of a home, but I could be wrong. But
there's a few in town. Ilya's online here too. Ilya, if you can hear me, do you want to speak to that item a little bit? Or
yes, thank you, Mayor Council. There are several fences in the front But in this case, it doesn't mean that they have to have that fence. If they want to put something there, they may build a new fence. It will just allow them to give them an option of doing this thing if they want to.
So basically, the fence would hide the accessory equipment.
Correct.
Correct. All right.
Thank you, Ilya. The other input from the council? Again, then back to the question on the table is is there interest from the council in introducing this ordinance and calling for the public hearing? Or does the council choose to take no action and wait until the public hearings can be held as they had prior to March 17th?
The mayor,
Yes, John.
I think delaying this anymore is probably going to cause more problems than moving ahead. So I would make a motion to call for the public hearing.
I'll second that motion.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If
Mr.
no,
Mayor,
yes, Steve.
there was one thing in there that I don't see now, and Jason, this was brought to my attention on the, what do they call it, retaining walls. Is that removed?
The retaining wall items in the next ordinance.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Any other discussion on the motion? If not, Kyle, would you take the vote?
Mayor Burns,
Yes.
Craig Schaefer,
Yes.
Steve Meister,
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler,
Yes.
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
Yes.
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
And the motion passes. The next agenda item then is similar. It was tabled at the last meeting. It relates to landscaping and storage. Is there a motion to remove this from the table?
So
So
I'll make
moved.
that motion.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, Kyle?
Mayor Burns,
Yes.
Craig Schaefer,
yes.
Steve Meister,
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler,
Yes.
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
Yes.
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
And the motion does pass. The action item would be to introduce this ordinance and call for the public hearing. Jason, any additional comments, or you want to also address the retaining wall question that Steve had?
We can sure speak about it if you'd like to. Once again, these changes largely the result of the tree policy and the interim use permit concept. There's also some other just minor changes, but to speak to that retaining wall item, I think you're referring to the language right in the top of there, 86-247A1, where it says retaining walls shall not be placed upon easements. That runs right in line with how we don't allow buildings to be placed on top of easements. Retaining walls can be pretty large and elaborate structures. So our statement is that structures shall not be placed in the easement. I think you'd have strong support for that from our local utilities, including Marshall Municipal Utilities. We do allow the fences, bushes, and shrubs, and it says right in there, if the utility has to damage them or move them, it's at their own expense. Well, it gets to be kind of a big deal if it's a $40,000 retaining wall setup. So that's the purpose of having that language in there. They can be expensive structures, and the easement is there to serve the utilities that serve the customers. It's not there for 100% homeowner use.
Questions for Jason?
My only concern, Mr. Mayor, is that right by my house at the intersection of Main Street and C Street, both houses on both sides have big retaining walls. So how do you explain that? There's also one right by, well, there's several. There's just several of them.
If it's lying in C Street, I don't think there's an easement there. So it just depends on where there happens to be a utility easement. I'm not sure. We'd have to look at that on a case by case basis. But
yeah, I mean it's right on Main Street and C Street, and it's right. I mean the retaining walls are right next to the sidewalk, so I can't imagine there's not an easement there. But
We do
Oh,
not
but that's
have,
on the property side, the property owner side, the easement or the right of way. That's a confusion between right of way and easement also.
yeah, we do not have easements around the perimeter of all properties. It's been a common practice with more recent plats to get more of those easements just to have them in place. But it's not a guarantee that there's an easement around every property line.
So Jason, is a road right away different than a utility easement? And I guess that's kind of answer the question.
Yes, it is. Yeah, the road right of way is property dedicated to public use for transportation and utilities. But
So
the easements, yeah, go ahead.
the retaining walls would still, because I know where Steve's talking, there's also one on the corner of Bruce and C Street or Lion Street there on the road right away there. And
Not on the right of way. That's on the private property, right on the property line, up against the right of way. It's right behind the sidewalk on private property.
so that sidewalk is right on the road right away. Because in these older neighborhoods, as we do roads, that's something you gotta be conscious of. And some of these houses do sit higher than the roads. So
Yeah, it's very typical for the sidewalk to be within 1 foot of the property line.
And that particular retaining wall, Jim, that was installed in 1988 as part of the sidewalk plan, and as part of the installation of that sidewalk, then there was enough slope there that they had to put that retaining wall. But you're right, that's on the property owners. Yeah. The wall's on the property owner, the sidewalk is on the city right away. Other questions for Jason? If not, a good discussion. Is there a motion to introduce and call for the public hearing?
Mr. Mayor,
I think, Steve, you were first. Motion by Steve, seconded by John.
That works.
Discussion? If not, Kyle?
Mayor Burns,
Yes?
Craig Schaefer,
Yes.
Steve Meister,
yes.
Glenn Bearcooler,
Yes.
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
Yes.
Jim Lozinski.
yes.
And the motion does pass. We'll move then to, thank you, Jason. We'll move then to agenda item number 15. This is the presentation of their 2019 year-end audit for the city of Marshall. I'm going to turn first to Annette Storm from our finance department, and she will introduce Andy Grice from our auditing firm. Annette?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight to present the 2019 year-end audit is Andy Grice with Bergen KDV.
Thank you, Annette, and thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Right now, I would like to share my screen, but it says that right now it's already being shared. So, oh, there we go. So I will pull that up. And to start things off, just wanted to go over the responsibilities of us as your auditor, and also the responsibilities of management. It is management's responsibility to prepare the financial statements. It's our responsibility as your auditor to come in and test and examine the information that supports the amounts being presented in your financial statements, and ultimately give an opinion on the financial statements. And when it comes to that opinion, I'm happy that we're providing an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion, which is the best opinion that we can give as your auditor. And what that does is provides assurance that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. We're also required to report on government auditing standards. And this report reports any internal control matters that rise to a significant deficiency or material weakness level, and also any compliance matters that come to our attention as a result of our audit. And we had just one internal control finding. And whenever we make an adjustment to your financial statements that was a result of an error in a prior period, we have to recognize that as an internal control deficiencies. And we did have prior period adjustments in this year's audit. We also had our report on compliance for each major program in accordance with the uniform guidance. And when you have federal money coming in excess of $750,000, it does require a single audit. And we did test the money received from PFA for the Clean Water State Revolving Funds. And when it came to that federal program audit, there were no compliance findings and also no internal control findings over compliance. We also issue a report on our testing of Minnesota legal compliance. So OSA requires our testing of certain provisions, which include contract and bidding, or deposits and investments, looking at claims and disbursements, and also debt and other matters, and had no finding come to our attention regarding Minnesota legal compliance. We also issue a report called the Communications Letter, which details our required communication in accordance with auditing standards. And that letter also provides some financial analysis as well, which we'll look at here in the next following slides. Now, when it comes to City Council's responsibility for the audit, they take their responsibility in the financial statements by establishing the budget. And the budget for 2019 called for $11.8 million in revenues, $12.2 million in expenditures, and expecting expenditures to exceed revenues by $377,000. The budget also called for transfers in of $255,000 and ultimately called for a decrease in fund balance of $122,000. Actual results came in for revenues at $12.4 million, which is $576,000 over budget, mainly driven by the reclassification or reimbursement in the miscellaneous category, and also having a conservative budget on investment earnings and licenses and permits. The expenditure category came in $214,000 over budget, mainly in the public works area. And ultimately, expenditures exceeded revenues by just over $14,000. So a $362,000 better performance than originally budgeted. And as a result of having better operations during the year than originally budgeted, was able to transfer out $375,000 to other funds for the year. The next chart shows the general fund balance and cash and investment balances here for the last 5 years. And there was a planned decrease in fund balance and cash and investment balances here in 2019. But when looking at the fund balance category, it's good to look at what the best practices are. So OSA recommends a fund balance level to be between 35 and 50% of operating revenues. And the city has its own policy to maintain an unrestricted fund balance of 5 months of the next year's budgeted expenditures. And at the end of the year for 2019, the unrestricted fund balance represented 51% of the subsequent year expenditures, or just over 6 months of expenditures, which is at the high end of the policy, which is great to see, especially in times like these. It's definitely safe to be at the high end of that range. The next chart here shows the general fund operations for the last 5 years. In 2019, breaking even, aside from the net transfers out of $375,000. And then the next chart shows revenues, expenditures, just in bar graph form for the last 5 years, again, being consistent in 2019. Next chart shows general fund revenues for the last 5 years. And as we saw earlier, there was an increase in general fund revenues, increasing about $300,000 in 2019. Next is general fund expenditures for the last 5 years. And in this chart, you can see that general fund expenditures did increase about $215,000. You can see that the expenditures are split up quite evenly between general government, public safety, and public works, which is a consistent ratio that you've had in prior years. Those categories make up the majority of the general fund expenditures. The next chart starts to take a look at the utility funds, and this is the wastewater treatment operations for the last 5 years. And in 2019, there was an operating income of just over $1 million, very consistent with 2015 through 2017. There was some other costs occurring in 2018, which had caused that to be lower for that 1 year. And then we also provide information on operating income without depreciation. Since depreciation is a non-cash item, it's also good to look at the cash flow excluding that item, and when excluding depreciation, had positive operations of just over $2.7 million. This next graph shows the cash and investment balances as well as the restricted and unrestricted net position in the wastewater treatment fund. With the positive operations occurring, did have an increase from 2018 to 2019, ending with a net position here of just over $8.2 million. There's also another component for amounts invested in capital assets, but just the restricted and unrestricted portion are presented here along with the related cash and investment balances. The next fund is the Municipal Liquor Store Fund, showing the operations for the last 5 years. And in 2019, had the highest operating income at $623,000. A lot of effort was gone in during the year regarding gross profit margins and had its best year to date. And then the next chart shows the cash and investment balances along with the restricted and unrestricted net position. And with the positive operations, the restricted and unrestricted net position rose to just over $2.2 million in 2019. Next is the Surface Water Management Fund operations, and revenues exceeded expenses for the year, resulting in an operating income of $235,000. And again, excluding depreciation, had positive operations of $773,000. When looking at cash and investments and net position in this fund, the restricted and unrestricted net positions decreased slightly, just over $2.1 million, along with the cash and investment balances. That was the high-level overview of the financial results. Just wanted to thank Carla and Annette for all their hard work. There's a lot of work that goes into preparing for these audits, and really appreciate all the work they put in and help it go be a smooth process. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Grice. Annette, anything more you would want to add?
Just want to thank Andy for all of his hard work and his staff, as this year with the COVID made it a little bit more difficult trying to connect in person. So we had to do everything via email and Zoom. And so it was a little more difficult this year, but overall we were very impressed and glad that we were able to get through it.
Thank you, Annette. And at this time, is there any input from the council? I would add the thanks to our finance staff. This was an independent audit report, but it does reflect good financial management, and that's due in large part to the expertise and the work of our finance department. So thank you. Any other input from the council? If not, is there a motion to accept the independent audit report on city finance?
I would so move.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Kyle, would you take the vote?
Mayor Burns,
Yes.
Craig Schaefer,
Yes.
Steve Meister,
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler,
Yes.
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
Yes.
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
And the motion does pass. Thank you. We'll move then to agenda item number 16. Consider expediting and streamlining the outdoor patio request. And of course, this is on our agenda because, as mentioned previously, the governor's executive order did indicate that June 1st there'll be the allowance for outdoor dining. In the past, those requests for use of sidewalks or even parking lot city right away required council action. I think this is the desire here, the intent here is to provide staff with be able to approve those requests administratively, as long as they can be done safely, so there isn't a time delay in waiting for the next council meeting. With that, Sharon?
Mr. Mayor and Council, we did receive several inquiries into if the city was willing to work with eating and drinking establishments to potentially provide outdoor patio space for those restaurants and bars that may not have that. Typically, I think for the city of Marshall, this would be our Main Street businesses. Most of the other restaurants and bars have their own private parking lot, or they have their own patio where they're able to do that. But we're not entirely sure what kind of requests we're going to get. It may be in addition to the Main Street businesses. So staff did, when this was issued on Wednesday, had a discussion on Thursday and Friday about ways we could assist these establishments in establishing a patio, outdoor patio space if they did not currently have one. And one of those options is to use the city-owned public parking lots. And city staff and the city already has a permit application. It's called private use of public streets and parking lots. There is no fee currently imposed for this permit, so that wouldn't need to be a change. But as the mayor's mentioned, this would be something that the public works director could approve in order to expedite the permit approval. Another part of this request before the council to get your direction and approval to move forward would be staff could assist businesses with sectioning off parking stalls via appropriate markings, maybe cones and some type of fencing or barrier. I think the fencing or barrier would be not extensive, considering that we don't know the end date to this particular relaxation of the restriction. It's possible that the governor would at some point allow indoor dining at a limited basis. We think that might be the next step that will happen with these particular restaurants. We also discussed the use of city-owned picnic tables by request. Currently, there is, I believe, a $10 per day per table charge. And we do have Preston Stensrud here today if there's questions on this, but we would like just some feedback from council. If you want to charge a fee for the use of those picnic tables, we have 100 picnic tables. We think that we could cover quite a few restaurants and drinking establishments in the city. If they wanted to use these picnic tables by request, we would request a damage deposit. The League of Minnesota Cities also put out some recommendations, and the one being that the establishment needs to ensure that they have liability coverage for this particular use of public-owned property or their own private property for use of outdoor patio space. I know that I put this in the memo. One of the comments from the Minnesota Deed Commissioner when this was issued on Wednesday was that they were encouraging cities to become creative on making this possible for restaurants, bars, and eating establishments. Although we did get several calls, I'm not entirely sure how much interest there'll be. As we all know, eating outdoors, limiting it to 50 patrons, the social distancing, some concerns over the weather, and maybe even just the staffing and logistics of this may not be ideal for some of our eating establishments. So we'll have to just kind of see how it goes. So I will pause for any questions or comments, but would like permission to proceed, and then also some feedback on a cost for the use of a city-owned picnic table if that was requested.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Craig.
Yeah, thanks. And Sharon, thank you for working on this. And I agree. I mean, I know that this isn't the ideal fix, but I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, and hopefully will help it, even if it's just a few. I think any effort we can make to try to help our businesses fit into the requirements and to get themselves open and serving the public in a safe and reasonable way is something that we definitely need to support. And I guess my gut thought on the table is turn the day rent into a weekly rent and just ask them to be responsible for theft and damage and just go from there. But I think that it's a good gesture and a good move to make that available and then try to support their efforts.
Craig, I'd like to echo your sentiment, and I know with our great staff, they'll work well with these restaurants to get this up and running. I think it's a great initiative to let the administration make the decisions. On the picnic tables, you know, I disagree a little bit. I think we should charge them a damage deposit and let them use the tables, because if a restaurant needs to use, let's say, 8 tables, that is $80 a week that is going to bite into their profits already. I do think we need to charge them a damage deposit in case one gets damaged. They should pay for it, but I would like to waive the fees on the tables, you know, for the time being until we can open up the inside of the restaurants. They pay taxes, so they technically help pay for the tables.
Yeah, and I got no problem with that. I just threw that out there as a discussion point. I don't disagree with that at all.
I'm in agreement with Jim on that. Also, and the other point on that is that because of the group gathering restrictions, we really cannot use those tables at our facilities. So,
Mr. Mayor, I just have a question to maybe to Sharon or even Preston regarding the tables. Are those tables the tables that were purchased in cooperation with the Sounds of Summer? And if so, I think then definitely we should have some type of damage deposit put on, because Sounds of Summer, I think, paid half of those tables.
Preston is in the room, but he did nod in agreement that those are Sounds of Summer related picnic tables.
Yeah, and again, the reason I say that is that for many, many years, and I put my Sounds of Summer hat on, we rented heavy wooden picnic tables. And a few years back, we went to Runnings and approached Runnings to buy those 100 picnic tables, and they gave us a very good price. And we partnered with the city to do that. Right now, if there's 20 or 30 tables that are damaged, somebody's got to have to pick up the tab for that.
Mr. Mayor,
yes, Steve.
I would make the motion that we accept this proposal as written, with the caveat that we do have a damage deposit on the picnic tables, but that the rental for the picnic table is $0. And it just gets returned in good condition or repaired or replaced as such.
I will second that.
Motion by Steve, seconded by John. Discussion on the motion.
The only thing I would like to see added to the motion is maybe put an end date of like August, or an end date in there for the picnic tables. So we kind of have an idea what's going on. Maybe when the governor, end date of when the governor open up restaurants back up, or August 30th, whatever. I just thrown that idea out there. But we should have an end date on the rental.
Right. That is addressed, Sharon.
Right. I think as soon as the restrictions are loosened further, that this would end. I mean, as soon as they're able to get inside the eating establishment.
So it would follow
end
the
it.
governor's recommendations.
Yeah.
That okay with you, Jim? That makes sense.
I think that makes sense, but I want to be careful with that, because if the governor just reopens these restaurants, let's say July 1st to 25%, I think we should allow them also to still have outside seating till they're more up and running. So then they can have revenue from both avenues. I think that should be a good discussion to have here.
Okay, other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll go to a vote. Kyle?
Mayor Burns?
Yes.
Craig Schaefer?
Yes.
Steve Meister?
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler?
Yes.
John DeCramer?
Yes.
Russ Labatt?
Yes.
Jim Lozinski?
Yes.
And the motion does pass. Thank you. Agenda item number 17 is the resolution that would extend the declared emergency. Sharon or Jim, I don't know if you plan on addressing this. I think the intent was that the governor's declaration goes till June 12th at this point, and to mirror those dates.
Right. The the purpose of the local emergency declaration is to ensure that we have the ability to recapture FEMA funds, and to correlate with the state is important. And then, as we all know, there has been, some personnel items and very small purchases that have occurred. And it gives the city flexibility. It is not about issuing orders. I think the mayor has stated this before. Those are driven by the state, and we are merely implementing the orders. So this is really separate from that. Anything else you want to? Did I miss anything, Jim? So.
Okay, questions the council has?
I do have some questions, and as we keep declaring this emergency, I look at the pandemic, and it hasn't affected Lyon County as bad as other counties. And I know I was visiting with a few folks about this today, but is there other reasons that we need to keep declaring this state of emergency in the city of Marshall beyond maybe trying to capture, I don't know, supposedly catch some funds, or just try to explain this more to the citizens? Because I've been asked, why do we keep doing this? And I don't have a really good answer that we need to keep doing this.
The other alternative is to not put an end date. When Lyon County adopted their resolution declaring a local emergency, they did not put an end date. It is still technically then in effect.
Other council members?
Yeah, and one of the points, it also, there are some decisions that need to be done expeditiously, and it still, I believe, gives the city administration and the mayor some ability to take action on behalf of the city for decisions that need to be made timely.
I think and Dr. Meister may want to comment on this, but, my view is, I, like everyone, would like this over, but we still are in a risk situation because of the pandemic, that it's not over at this point. So I think we still have a responsibility for implementation of the governor's orders.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I would agree with you 100%. We're nowhere near the end of this, but to that regard, as opposed to just extending it every meeting, is what are the downsides to just putting a resolution that we follow the governor's edict or follow the county's edict, since we are part of the county?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my view would be it would make sense to follow the governor's timetable on the state declared emergency, rather than leaving it open-ended as Lyon County did. So I'd be fine either way. Other views of the council?
Just a quick question again. So financially, how does this affect us, whether we declare it or not declare it?
There is the potential of funding that may be available to the city either through FEMA or through the federally passed CARES Act, or from perhaps some future type stimulus dollars. So at this time, is there a financial incentive? We don't know. Perhaps there will be in the future. Anything more on that, Sharon? Any other views of the council?
I move that we extend the resolution enacting under the authority of Minnesota statute section 12.29 and 12.2.37 to extend the period of the declared local emergency in correlation with the governor's declaration of June 12th, 2020.
And I would second that motion.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion?
What exactly would be any of the negatives if we adopt this?
there really isn't a negative, in my opinion, to doing it.
The only negative I see is the public misinterpreting that this is somehow related to the governor's orders on restricting movement or business operations, which this is not related to that whatsoever. And so hopefully that is communicated by anyone who asks, and hopefully it's reported in that fashion.
Other discussion on the motion?
Yeah, this discussion we had is kind of what I was trying to spur, and thank you for answering that, Sharon, because I do think there's a misconception out there that we've made businesses close, and the city marshal has not. And I think Craig said he's in touch on this later on when I visited with him earlier today. So that I want this discussion out publicly so the people know, the citizens of Marshall know that we're not dictating who's open and who's not. We're just doing very minor things to keep the city flowing very smoothly. So thank you.
The one thing I'll add, you know, when we first declared this back in March, it was pretty scary because we didn't know what was going to happen with community-wide spread. And now we think we have a better idea. Obviously, there's models and there's projections, and we're feeling okay because the numbers don't look too bad. I think that can instantly change, and it may mean additional resources that, you know, would need a quick decision. So I think, you know, again, it appears that nothing is needed, but things can change very quickly. And I would assume that for people who have studied and looked into this, that's a very real possibility yet. I think that's one of the discussions out there is kind of these clusters and these outbreaks that maybe more so than just community-wide spread that could occur. So I think about that. I could go on and on, but you know, there is, besides the FEMA funding and, you know, the risk and the threat is still out there. So I think the correlation with the governor's timeline kind of makes sense, even though, as Councilmember Lozinski stressed, it is not related to the orders or the restrictions on business.
Thank you, Sharon. And that's a great discussion. And that's kind of the piece as we extend it. It's our ability as a community and our city government to make decisions quickly under stressors that, I mean, since we last extended this order, I don't think we've had to take any of those actions that brought us up to tonight, but to have that opportunity or that ability open to react quickly if we need to is important to keep it there. And the potential for reimbursement is secondary, because for a community our size, getting federal reimbursement when the whole country is in this is a crapshoot anyway.
Yep. Agree.
Any other discussion on the motion?
I just have one last comment here. I will vote for it. And I am concerned about the financial part. If we do qualify for some financial assistance, that would be helpful to the city and our businesses and city government. I guess my concern is that I do you know, things are getting better. We're getting more back to normal. We're loosening the requirements, and it's nice if we can send a positive message. And somehow by declaring this emergency, it's still being perceived as negative and things are really bad. And I'd like to see more of a positive approach to this. And I certainly nationwide and worldwide, there are people that feel that we have overreacted to this situation. And there are states and communities. I know there are individuals that are traveling from Marshall to Brookings to go to a movie because they can go to a movie in Brookings and they can't go to a movie in Marshall. And so different communities and states around our nation, things are getting more back to normal. And I do hope we can send positive messages to our citizens.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Steve.
I hate to do this, but I feel compelled to comment on that. everything we do before a pandemic is alarmist, and everything we do after a pandemic is inadequate. I've said that multiple times, and I beseech Councilmember Bear Kohler to look at the data out of the Twin Cities, where we have a paucity right now of ventilators with very few of them available. 54 ventilators at Hennepin County. There are none available. They're all in use right now. So this is not getting better necessarily. I think in some places it is, and in some places it's not. And as Administrator Hansen said, it can and it will change on a dime. And I don't want to have to be the person who decides who gets that ventilator and who doesn't. And unfortunately, I'm on the team that gets to do that. So I think that declaring the emergency and following the governor, who's done, I think, just a fantastic job. I appreciate that we are closed and that people are getting sick of it. I've seen posts online where people think our governor is a communist and totally restrictive. As a healthcare professional, I think we're, as the old adage says, damned if you do and damned if you don't. And I appreciate it. But as a doctor who's sworn to take care of people and will be in the front line, I've taken an oath to uphold, and I just don't want to see more people die. That's all.
Thank you, Steve. Any other discussion on the motion?
Just my last comment. I'm not so much. I'm not in agreement that I think that the governor's done such a great job. I think I'm not in agreement with all of his policies. I think he's been over restrictive. I'm more in agreement with some of the policies that are being taken in other states and other communities.
So our action, certainly it would be easy for all of us to delve into diversions that become political discussions. Our action, of course, is non-political, and it is the action on the table is to extend that local declaration until June 12th, and then follow the subsequent directives from the governors on the statewide emergency. So is there any other discussion related to that item on the table, that motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Kyle?
Mayor Burns,
Yes.
Craig Schaefer,
Yes.
Steve Meister,
Yes.
Glenn Bear Kohler,
Yes.
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
Yes.
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
And the motion does pass. Thank you. Good discussion. We'll move then to agenda item number 18 to authorize the acceptance of the FAA CARES Act grant funding agreement. And again, we were just talking about funding related to the emergency, and here we have some. Jason?
Thank you, Mayor. This is a grant being provided in accordance with the CARES Act to provide eligible airports with funding to help maintain quality, reliable, safe, and efficient airport operations. It'd be the city marshal's intent to use these grant funds to do some roof repairs on the AD building, the arrival departure building. We do have a roof leak that's kind of popped up, and we would like to address it. And this funding is extremely timely for that. So with that, I think we would recommend that the council authorize us to accept and execute this agreement.
Any questions on this?
I move the motion to execute the FAA CARES Act grant funding for the airport.
I'll second that.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Steve.
in reading this act, I didn't see any hidden stipulations or requirements that we do anything. This looks like a pretty wide open grant as long as we use it for what we're going to use it for. Am I correct in that reading?
That's how we're reading it as well. It's a reimbursement. It's not cash up front, but it's pretty open as long as it's towards maintenance and operation of your airport facility.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on the
And I
motion?
can see our attorney pointing out, I think we have 4 years to use it. Is that what you were going to point out?
No, I was going to point out a couple of requirements I want to ask of Carla of the finance department. We only get reimbursement if we use a Delphi invoicing system. Is that available? Do we use that now?
I can't speak for Carla. I'm not quite sure what we are currently using for the reimbursement. That doesn't sound familiar to me though.
I mean, that's one of the provisions in here. You have to use their system and also a specific requirement for accounting of the use of funds at the end. I'm assuming that's pretty standard, but it was a Delphi e-invoicing system.
And I can look into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll look into that.
Right. And then also there are some solicitation. If we call for proposals or bids, there are some requirements that have to be in that solicitation, which is different than our normal, as well as some required contract provisions that the engineering department would need to make sure to include those in there.
Yep, that's a good point. It'll be federal funds, so you got to follow federal guidelines, and there's some documents that need to be included in those projects. Before we go forward with any project, we'll certainly, we'll bring the award in front of the council. We'll get quotes for the project, and we'll bring it in front of the council. But before we do our end, we'll certainly check with the FAA like we typically would.
Very good. Any other discussion on the motion?
Jason, I have some questions. So the $69,000 grant, that can be used for all different type of purposes at the airport, or just can only be used for roof repair?
Maintenance and operation. So many different uses.
And you made a decision that the number one priority for this use would be the roof repair?
That's correct. It came up on us and we did not have it scheduled in our CIP. We have no other funding identified for it. So it was very timely that no more than a couple of weeks after we started talking about how we're going to address the issue, this funding popped up.
And what will be the total cost of the roof repairs then?
We're not certain. We're not certain yet at this time, Councilman. We're thinking somewhere around $50,000, but we have not got that put together yet.
And then if we spend 50, then the other 19 would go for other projects then?
Yes, it can. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
I
Steve.
hate to belabor the point, but if we do require that, if we're required to get that Delphi system and it's significant, could that be submitted under the grant as well?
We'll look into this. You know, this is a good thing that was brought up, and we appreciate that. But we'll look into it. Maybe it's an accounting system that you can use online, similar to some other programs that the DOT has that you don't need to purchase. We'll look into it.
Thank you. I would not want to vote for it if we had to purchase the Delphi system or software, anything like that, and it wasn't reimbursed.
Any other discussion on the motion? If not, Kyle, will you take the vote?
Mayor Burns,
Yes.
Craig Schaefer,
Come on. Yes.
Steve Meister,
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler,
Yes.
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
yes,
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
Okay, and that motion does pass. Thank you, Jason. Agenda item number 19, consider the application for exempt permit for SMSU Foundation for an event September 19th, 2020. Are there any questions on this? If not, is there a motion?
Move the.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, Kyle, will you take the vote?
Mayor Burns,
Yes.
Craig Schaefer,
Yes.
Steve Meister,
Yes.
Glenn Bearcooler,
Abstain.
John DeCramer,
Yes.
Russ Labatt,
yes,
Jim Lozinski.
Yes.
That motion does pass. We'll move then to council member board liaison reports. The Southwest Regional Development Commission did meet this since we met. They met by Zoom. One of the opportunities that was discussed is through the CARES Act. There's significant funding that is being made to I'll call them EDA contractors. And so the Southwest Regional Development Commission does have a federal EDA contract for the revolving loan fund, which started following the 1993 floods, and there was $1 million grant that was received, and that is what created the revolving loan fund. So there's the opportunity to more than double that fund through CARES Act funding, and that application is currently in process, and I'll be involved in that since I do chair the Regional Revolving Loan Fund. Fire Relief Association has not met since we last met. So we'll move then to Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Southwest Regional or Southwest Minnesota Amateur Sports Commission met this afternoon, conference call, and hadn't met for a while. So we basically went through all of the member groups, MAHA, MEBA, talked to the high school, talked to the college, and just got an update on where everybody's at. And of course, there's some excitement with the governor relaxing a little bit and going into this next phase of trying to open back up. And so there was talk about, assistance to the arena to put ice back on the Lockwood Arena floor and getting volunteers from MAHA to work with Cody and the folks out at Red Baron Arena and Expo to get that ice ready. And they talked about how they're doing it in pods, and Mabe is talking about the same thing, and there was a lot of correlation to that and what that has to do with our sponsor people with with stays, and opening Red Baron up also opens up to other communities who are going to want similar ice time and rentals. And they talked about doing reaching out a little bit further to allowing other programs to come in possibly too, so that we put heads in beds overnights, and even if it's curbside pickup or sidewalk or plaza dining, that we start getting people back in and getting our hospitality, food and lodging activities back up. So it was a real good meeting, a lot of positive. I guess I would call it positive patience that we're seeing there, and an excitement and a rethinking of how we do things. And one of the statements I heard consistently from all the parties is thinking outside of the box and reinventing how they do things. And a lot of things are already being done virtual with the athletes for conditioning and individual development. So it was very encouraging to have that meeting, and I think there's a positive thing moving forward now.
Okay. Thank you, Craig. Steve?
So Community Services Advisory Board and Cable Commission did not meet, and EDA, I was busy with work, so I missed that one, and I'll defer to Councilmember Kramer.
Okay. And Glenn?
My commissions have not met.
John?
EDA did meet. There was a call for a public hearing for a sale of a lot out in Parkway Edition. Also a decision by the EDA to add some additional funding to the small city development program. Requests have exceeded what normally was considered through deed, and we have some funds that do have restrictions tied to really use, such as the small cities grants. So we've decided to put some additional funding and fund the last two that did apply. It's not likely that we're going to qualify again for another small cities grant in the next 2 to 3 years. So prefer to just get that money out there and put it to work. We took action on the loan policy earlier tonight in the consent agenda, and EDA approved 2 facade improvement loans. Marshall Utilities did meet. They happened to meet on the same night as our local board of regarding taxation. I was able to attend part of the meeting. They did go through, update their, what they call their KPI or key performance indicator goals for the year. Approve that through the commission. They took some action, which I'm not totally clear on since I wasn't able to finish the meeting, but there was some action on the emergency customer assistance that's being reviewed. And separate from the normal commissioner meeting, there were for 3 days on May 13th, 14th, and 15th, interviews were conducted for general manager position. Was decided by the commission to move forward with 2 of the individuals, and those in-person interviews are being scheduled. They may have been already scheduled for hopefully for June 5th, but that was the target date. So things are moving along in the interviewing process. We had some good Zoom interview sessions, and out of there it was pretty much a unanimous decision as far as who the 2 individuals are that are moving forward. That's about it.
Okay, thank you, John. Russ?
Library Board and Police Advisory Board have not met since our last meeting. We did meet with the CVB. We took action on updating our website and hired a company out of Redwood Valley Technical Solutions. We have worked with them before on some other projects with the CVB. We voted not to participate in the city app, that we felt that the cost of $12,000 a year was not adequate at this time, or wasn't beneficial. Hotels have expressed concern with the stays in bed normally. We all can expect that. They're saying that their occupancy is down close to 75, maybe even 80%. They're seeing cancellations through July. They're starting to see some reservations made in the later part of fall, October, things like that. Restaurants share the same thing, although they are very happy to see that the governor loosened things up a little bit. But they too have seen wedding receptions being canceled. But on the positive side, they're booking wedding receptions for next year. So it's an ongoing thing with us. We talked about our budget and the effect of the hospitality tax on our budget. So we're maintaining a pretty tight fist or a tight pocketbook with what's going on for the present year. So that's all I have.
And Jim?
Mine did not meet, but I'd like to give an update on City Hall at this time. I know it's a committee and not a commission. But we had our City Hall meeting last Wednesday. City Hall is still on schedule, going well. With the hotel coming down, there has been some discussion now about putting windows on what I would call the east side of the building. And that's being discussed amongst staff right now. And Barb was involved with our meeting at that time. They come up with options. And obviously the question I always ask is price. I do know with the hotel coming down, there's some shuffling of rooms that'll actually be some cost savings in back of City Hall because Glenn isn't on with us tonight, but there's a shaft in back of City Hall that we can use as a duck chase instead of rebuilding it, which worked out very well. So other than that, City Hall is on schedule and going forward. And my other committees do not meet.
Thank you, Jim. And we do need to add that on the list. And I thank you, Jim, as well as the rest of the committee for your work on the City Hall committee, because that is you're doing good work there, and it's an extra load that the 3 members are carrying. So thank you. We'll move then to council member individual items. Jim, let's start on your end.
I just, I don't have much tonight, but I just want to reiterate what Steve said. I know I don't want to sound political. I always think of my daughter who's now a nurse up in Duluth. And when she calls home because she's worn a mask for 18 hours because she worked a double shift, to the citizens out there, please keep that in mind for our healthcare workers and our frontline workers who do deal with this on a day-to-day basis. And again, I don't want to sound political. I'm actually sounding selfish, saying, I don't want my daughter working 18 hours wearing an N95 mask because she says it's a very miserable experience. So as we go out as citizens, keep in mind our healthcare workers who do deal with us on the backside when we do get sick. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Russ?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In reference to some of our materials that we received with our packet tonight, we can see that we're going to be start discussing our 2021 budget shortly. One of the things that I would like to see is that we all probably know that the upcoming year is going to be tough. It's been tough on our businesses. It's going to be tough on our city operations. And I've made reference to before that the city is a big business. I guess I would like to see that for the remainder of the year that we look at all of our expenses and we kind of curtail those that are unnecessary. And I know that we're going to have expenses that come up that are necessary and that we do have to spend money, but might be others that we can maybe save or put off and not spend the funds, because next year is going to be a tough year and we're not going to be able to go with a levy increase. I also like to talk a little bit about communication. We recently had a work session with communication, and I think our communication amongst staff and the mayor and the council, I think sometimes is good and sometimes it's bad. I said I think we need to improve our communication between staff and council, and also between council and the mayor. I think that the council needs to be made aware of decisions that are taking place. And I think that can very easily be done via email or a Zoom meeting or something like that. So I think communication is going to be critical in the upcoming months and the upcoming year. And I just challenge all of us to keep that in mind. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, John?
The one thing I'd like to talk about is, we did go through and we just had our audit tonight. And, this was a second opinion on our finances and really how our policies and how our finance department works. And, previous audit company said we had a good run operation. We now have a second opinion that says we have a good run operation. We have a city that's financially in good shape. So I just want to recognize that, in switching over to a different audit company, it was really the council that wanted to do that, because we do need to take a second look or have a second set of eyes go in on it, that we've had the same audit firm for quite some time. We know it was stressful on our finance department, not that they certainly needed any more stress this year, but this added some more to it. But I think the end result is a reaffirmation that we have a excellent finance team in both Annette and Carla. And I just think we need to recognize that, as well as a well-run city. One of the items that was listed deep down in some of the audits was a comment that, our revenue has increased partially due to some investments that were made. I know in particular, Carla's been working on rearranging some of our investments and really trying to squeeze some more blood out of that turnip, as far as trying to get some more dollars into the city from investments. And just, we need to recognize that and say thank you to our finance department. That's it.
And thank you, John. Craig?
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize. I got a little bit of a double clutch here when I get back into trying to move from one screen over to the other.
Now you're muted.
Yeah, as soon as I'll just undo it when I use the space bar. If I go off to the other screen, then I end up back on mute. So
we're not going to what's on that other screen, but go ahead.
It's just some crib notes. It's good. It's like having two scribble pads, and I really appreciate that too, because I need that. Had some conversations recently with Sharon. I know that, Public Safety Director Chief Marshall and I have spoken a lot in the last 2.5 or 3 months about what to expect with the stresses that come with all of the changes in how we all live and probably even more critically, how our businesses are or not able to operate. And, to the really smart people that deal in personal and human behavior, it seems very predictable. My experience has always been in working with natural disasters or other incidents that are more community or area involved, and not such a big area where it's all inclusive like this. But the grieving process is still predictable, and we're seeing a lot of bad things happen to really good people, and it does cause a lot of pressure and a lot of concern. And some of that is targeted back to the city, and some of it, duly noted. We have a responsibility here, but we also have some things that we're being assigned responsibility for that probably really isn't fair to the city. And I just wanted to highlight on a few of the things that the city is doing to try to help it out. I mean, we're as a city council, and as our city administration and employees are all concerned about the strength and vitality of our business and our community. And I just want to hit some of the high bullets. And I thank Sharon for helping me go through this and sharing some of this. So some of what I'm going to list here, the credit all goes to our mayor, our administrator, and to other department heads and officer marshal or chief marshal. A couple things we talked about tonight. One was the establishment of the business EDA loan program, and it hasn't been taken great advantage right now, but there's certainly intentions of looking at recovery as well. The council took action to prorate liquor licenses, especially for those on sale facilities that aren't making revenue. We don't want to hit them with a license fee when they're not getting income off of that. There was the question about, delay of property tax payments. Some of the cities in the county opposed that due to their own budgets. We took no position on that. It is what it is, and people are going to make the decisions they have to make, and we respected that. We also took no position on the ability for liquor license to have takeout alcohol. We could have adopted a resolution to not allow that, but that was an easy discussion on the council's part, and we understood that, and we allowed that to happen. One of the other things we acted on tonight was the consideration of public-owned property for private use, and the picnic tables also for outdoor patios. I know that our community, our city leaders have been in weekly emails and communications with both the legislators and our governor, advocating for business openings and regarding the orders. It's important for us to paint the picture to the governor and those decision makers of what things do look like in Marshall and in Lyon County. And I think that we've been very active as a community in making sure that that message and that point of view gets pushed out there. I know that I believe there's a couple additional phone calls, conversations that are scheduled here in the coming week or this week. There's been our police department, I know, has had daily conversations with everybody, business, public, and others regarding the orders. And the city has taken the approach of education, not enforcement. Some of the cities in the Southwest region have been doing more enforcement versus education. And I'm glad and proud that our city and our police department has taken the approach of education. The city's participated in the business survey with EDA and the chamber. My hat's off to Alex and the folks at Studio One. I know that they did an awesome job of virtual graduation and editing for the high school. And I haven't seen the finished product, but I've seen a number of good inputs about it. And I think that's an awesome thing for us to do. And I know that Alex and Studio One have been doing a lot of other work there too, and helping us with our technology to stay in communication and to try to give the community a good way into us and to not lose that contact. There's been an awful lot of planning and discussion and helping with Avera and the county with surge planning, and Doc Meister talked about that earlier this evening, and maybe it's not on the thought of people, but it's such a critical balance. And again, if, like Doc Meister said, look at the metro and where they're at right now. God, I hope we don't have to make those decisions out here. And then just too many conversations with business owners between the city to even track. And I know the council members are all having that too. And I think it's important that we continue to reach out and listen to and try to get the information straight to as many people as we can. So I just wanted to take my time and just go over that and thank Sharon for helping put that together. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Steve?
I think I've said enough already tonight. I don't have anything really more to say other than wear your masks, wear them correctly, wash your hands, cover your cough, and stay home if you're sick. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Glenn?
I have no comments.
Okay. From my part, let me just, I'm going to kind of reference Steve here also to thank him for being participating with me on these videos. And I know Chief Marshal also has been a part of that, and some of the early ones. The superintendent of school, Scott Munson, was on those. So it kind of falls in line with the earlier this year, we did adopt a strategic plan, and certainly communication with the public is one of those things. And each time that we do one of those videos, there is between 3,000 and 5,000, sometimes more views that are on that. So I actually think we're doing a pretty good job with our following through with our strategic plan with communication with the public. As always, I would say all of our phones are workable. If there's questions, as many of our public have, just reach out when there are questions. With that, we'll move on then to staff report. Sharon?
Yes, just a follow-up to Council Member Labatt on some of the financial projections. I appreciated the feedback on the hotels and kind of what they're experiencing. I did probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago kind of do a revenue and expenditure projection and how the COVID situation may affect the city budgets. And at that time, I was projecting about $800,000 shortfall in revenue. That included some reduction in expenses. And that would be for a 12-month period. And that would be for a total shutdown. And now that we're opening up a little bit, that's going to change. And, to be honest, on the financial picture, I don't know where we're going to be. We can kind of project it. And I also, I still hold true to this, and I said this early in the beginning of this, is that it is very unlikely that if we have large reductions in revenue, we cannot do this alone. It isn't going to help to do a 0% levy to make up $800,000. It's not going to make it. And I know that there's been some communication with the league and at the national level as well about help for state and local government as a result of this. So, nobody likes to get a bailout and nobody wants to take printed money, but I just don't see us, if the revenue projections hold, I don't see us doing this alone, and we're going to need to have assistance. It's just the fact or reality of it. Couple other financial specifics on this. We did get some feedback from Lyon County Auditor Treasurer E.J. Moberg about property tax payments for the first half. And it's really hard to right now kind of, even this is according to E.J., he'd have to do some in-depth research, but he's saying at this point, they've got about 96% of the first half of their taxes. How does that compare to last year? That's something he can't answer, but we think it's maybe within 2 to 3% of where we were last year. So it's not a huge change. We do know that there's some larger business property taxes that did not come in for the city of Marshall. So if we had those, they may be just waiting. They're taking maybe the penalty of 1% that was allowed by Lyon County. So again, if we get towards the end of the year and looks like that might come in full. That'll help a lot as well. The other area that we don't know yet is sales tax. Yes, food, beverage, and lodging. I think one could argue that looks like in the current state, we're going to have a reduction of 70% or more. But on general sales tax, some of the other states for the month of April, we don't have ours reported yet, are around that 9 to 10% reduction. We know that individual businesses have had 70% or more less sales. That equates to far less payment into sales tax, the general sales tax. But overall, we have some businesses in Marshall that are doing very well. Runnings, Walmart, Menards, Ace Hardware is doing well as in addition, and I'm probably missing a whole bunch. So those are big sales tax revenue generators for the city of Marshall. So the 9 to 10% may be conservative in terms of reduction, but it may be fairly accurate. So let me just kind of comment on communication too, because I actually do kind of feel really bad. I talked to the mayor about about this actually earlier today about, just whenever you have a situation like this, the rule of thumb, of course, is to over communicate. And part of the issue is, and I think Dr. Meister and Craig and the mayor and Jim Marshall probably know this really, really well. You just run out of time. Most of the time we're, for us, we're talking from 7 o'clock in the morning till, 6 o'clock at night. Early on, it was Saturday and Sundays. Just kind of checking in and, it's reading a lot. It's kind of taking it all in and trying to figure out what to do. I really felt that the work session that we had on labor relations was really good. We took time in a work session type environment to kind of explain what we were doing. And I know earlier in an open session, Jim Marshall gave a rundown of some of the things that we did. So, if we think we want to do that again and just kind of talk about, just have an open session and talk about some of the things that we've done or kind of what's happening, we can certainly schedule one and we can ask questions and try to answer them. I think that might be helpful. The nice thing about emails or doing a work session is that all 7 council members get to hear the same thing at the same time. Individual conversations are really, really great, but some council members are left out. And obviously for some of it, like City Hall, you want to go to the experts and people who are on the committee. So it isn't a hard, fast rule, but that's another kind of thing when you're doing communication is how do you get it out to everybody so you're not favoring one council member over another. And so it's a struggle, definitely, for sure in the last 2 months. Hopefully it'll get better now. I think we've done, now we've done a lot of planning and now it may come to more of the discussion stage, but I just kind of want to explain that too. I think I could do better, but it is a time thing. It's just, it's exhausting. And you kind of need to get away from it a little bit. So, but maybe a work session or some other way to kind of bring it all together. So that's all I had, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor.
Thank you, Sharon. Jason?
The Legion Field Stormwater Project, we're planning to advertise for that at the end of this week. We're targeting June 16th for a bid opening and bringing it to council for their consideration on the 23rd of June. That's all pending documents getting in line and easements being acquired and property being transferred. A lot of work ahead that I know our attorney's been working on. So that's a tentative schedule there. And it was kind of, because it was pertinent today, there was a lot of folks that lost power this morning. And just in case you heard about that, that was just related to some work on 4th Street with the gas company's contractor. run into MMU's power line. So it took a large chunk of the town out of power for a short period of time. But other than that, I don't think I've got anything.
Okay. Questions for Jason or questions for Sharon? I guess I didn't ask that. If not, Dennis?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just a few things. In response to Councilmember Labatt, I have heard from Maha regarding the Maha agreement for next year. I've been reminded, while I want to say the ball is in our court, I'll try to, the puck is in our home ice and we have to take care of it and get a response from the Community Services Department. So I'll meet with Scott soon on that. As Jason indicated, next, the Buffalo Ridge concrete plat. If you could come up with a title issue imaginable, it's involved in that project. And easement, we've chosen the two properties where we have to run an easement on the most difficult properties to obtain easements from because they're held in trust and we've got life estate issues. So just tracking down documents will be a little bit on that one. And on the Commerce Park, the transfer of property to MMU where they have an option agreement. We're having a very difficult time getting documents from the Minnesota Management and Budget Office. MMB is kind of holding all of that up. Continue to work to try to get those documents to get that property cleared for transfer. Have not heard from Helena for a while. And then responding to citizens' complaints about garbage and junk located on a property on Elaine Street. We're responding to that. I've addressed that. We have an absentee owner and a vacant house that's overgrown with vegetation, dandelions and unmowed grass, but then junk. And so we'll have to take care of that. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Dennis? If not, you have the information items, including the list of building permits, as well as the listing of upcoming meetings. Is there anything else to come forward at this meeting? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll do a voice vote on this. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, everyone.